Look at verse 2 of the 13th Psalm real quickly with me. He says this, "How long shall I take counsel in my soul?" Now here's the key. "Having sorrow in my heart daily." What he said is, my mind seems troubled. David says, I have dark thoughts and uncontrolled emotions. In fact, when Keil and Delitzsch, the great German Hebrew experts, went through this, they said the construction of David's words were a reflection of having dark feelings. His emotions were dark, and he says, I just feel like everything's just out of control. My emotions are uncontrolled. My thoughts are darkened. You know, he loved the Lord, but listen, all the stress of the terrible plight he was in, from Saul, from the Philistines, and now as he's on the run to a cave, that terrible plight drained him of all peace and all joy. He had a spiritual flat tire. And what he said is, my mind seems troubled. What David's going through is a common experience. David was swept away by his emotions, and those emotions caused him to not be able to calmly reflect on the faithful hand of God in the past. And when he couldn't reflect on God's faithfulness in the past, he couldn't feel the comfort of trusting his future to the Lord. David ruminated and meditated so long on disaster after disaster, he began to just feed this and fuel the fire of this darkness of his soul. And he couldn't stop. It was almost like it was snowballing and going down faster and faster. Emotionally, he was just going downhill. And that led to feed these dark thoughts of hopelessness. Now, there are many, many causes for these feelings that David confesses. We can see them in the lives of people in Scripture. So I want you to think about that because, again, you don't have to be running from the Philistines, and you don't have to have a personal adversary that's trying to kill you physically to go through these kind of emotions. And there are many causes for them. One is emotional temperament. David was probably of the temperament that was more prone to discouragement. I mean, if you've read the Psalms, David is up, down, up, down. And did you know that's a personality type? That's someone that is prone to having these feelings, these unbelievable temperament feelings that are prone to discouragement. Now here, again, let me quote from Martin Lloyd-Jones again. The opening pages of his monumental book that I previously cited about the causes and cures for spiritual depression, he said this, "Foremost among all causes for spiritual depression is temperament." See, there isn't a good temperament and a bad temperament. If you are one of these flatline people, you think the up and down people are just uncontrollable. And if you're an up and down person, you think that the flatline people don't care about anything, and they just have no feelings. And see, God designed us, we're little spiritual snowflakes. We're all very differently wired. And there are temperaments that are prone to discouragement. And that's what David was. But also, it's not just emotional temperament. What's another common cause that we find in the Scriptures for these feelings that David is confessing about? Well, physical weakness. You don't have to read far in the Scripture before you bump into one of the greatest of all of God's servants. You remember his name, Elijah. Elijah stood against a nation. Elijah stood against a king and his entire army. Elijah stood against an entire army of false priests of Baal. And he was total, unflinching, unafraid. He even, when he won, do you remember on Mount Carmel and the fire on the altar and who is the Lord, that whole scene in 1 Kings 18, do you remember what he did? He had all 400 of those prophets slaughtered. He probably was right there making sure the last one was dead. But then he was tired and he was hungry and he runs for his life from one woman, Jezebel. And we find him sitting under a broom tree in the desert saying, God, I don't want to live anymore. I'm ready to die. I have no purpose left to live. And you know what the Lord does? He pats him on the back and smiles at him and says, you need a little rest and you need to eat. And so if you read the Scriptures, he rested him and fed him, has a private retreat with him, and Elijah's right back there. You see, sometimes it's physical weakness and a plunge into disquieting thoughts and emotions can be caused by physical factors. And illness is a good example. Now, when I was little, my parents used to give me the same presents for my birthday and for Christmas. And they'd say, now we want to do something that's significant, and so we want to tie these presents together. We don't have many resources. What would you like? And I said, I would like to have the consecutive volumes of Charles Haddon Spurgeon. Now, back then, those were 600-700 page, and they were very expensive for my parents. My father worked in the auto industry and was just an hourly employee, and so it was a significant investment for him to buy one of these. And so I would get one of these volumes, and I would read Spurgeon. Let me tell you about Spurgeon, my hero. He was one of the greatest evangelical leaders of the last century, but he suffered from constant, reoccurring bouts of depression. Why? Why would such a giant, such an incredible expositor, such an incredible writer and pastor have severe bouts of paralyzing depression? Well, the main reason, as we look back, is he suffered from gout. It was marked by a painful inflammation of all of his joints. He had this excessive amount of uric acid in his blood, and he shared a health condition that many people in his generation shared from the British Empire, from their eating habits and lack of exercise and fresh air and everything else from that time period, that just physically drained him, caused him to have no strength, and because his temperament was prone to depression, it just would start snowballing. And if you know Spurgeon's history, his wife would often have to just help him into bed when he'd get back from church, and he would sleep and stay in bed for sometimes 2 and 3 days. And then she would, in fact, in his biography it says that sometimes he would be so troubled that in his sleep he would talk, and she would write down what he said, and that would later become his outline, because he was so discouraged he couldn't have his sermon that he would be dreaming about it and talking in his sleep. But Spurgeon is a great example that we should always, like David, like Elijah, like Charles Haddon Spurgeon, when we're hungry and tired, we should beware of the times of this extreme fatigue and physical weakness, making an open door for the devil or our flesh to try and push us down. One last area we can see from the Scriptures, emotional temperament is one reason that David's mind seemed troubled. His physical weakness was another. But another is letdown. Another weak time is often caused by a great event, and then the letdown, the emotional crossing over the top and then dropping down to a kind of a lesser time in our life. And those letdowns in our life are truly a time that we should be careful. And one of the greatest examples of this is found in the Gospels. If you read the 4 Gospels carefully, you find that Jesus Christ always went on some type of a personal spiritual retreat after the big events of his life. Right after the feeding of the 5,000, what does he do? He goes alone and has this extended period of prayer. See, he needed the face of the Father. He wanted to always commune and say, I want to do your will. And not because Jesus was lacking anything, but because he was the example to us that he could not exist apart from that retreating to be strengthened and renewed by his Father. Any less for us? If there's a pattern in your life, look for letdowns leading to a quick roller coaster ride down emotions, and then discouragement, and then abandonment feelings, and learn to head that off by a personal retreat to the Word in prayer. Even an accountability with your partner if you're married, or with close friends if you're not married, or with both. And ask those around you to hold you accountable. When they see you succeeding, saying, watch out, remember, that's a delicate time. That's a time where you better be careful and prepare for that. Well, what's David saying when his mind feels troubled? He's saying, I can't stop these feelings of dejection. I can't stop these feelings of abandonment.